We've got apologies from Councillor Smith and Councillor Woodhead.
And we've been notified that Councillor Skinner will be with us, but is being delayed slightly. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest by members and officers, if any. There are none. Agenda item 3, declaration of any intentions to record this meeting. We, of course, are doing so and streaming. And I welcome those who are watching it live elsewhere or will be watching it in catch-up subsequently. But is anybody else intending to record it? No, thank you. Right, the fourth item is the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of August. If you wish, I sign those as a true record. Thank you. We then move on to items for decision. And can I advise members that I'll be taking an additional item as it's a decision. It'll be agenda item 6A, and that relates to a planning application being considered by South Kesteven this Thursday, and we'll say more at the time. So let us now move on to the items we have before us for decision this afternoon. And the first one is the land of Sandhills Sconce, Tolney Lane, Newark. Lisa.
Thank you, Chairman. So you'll note from the description on the agenda at page 8 that this is an application to vary condition 1 of the 2018 planning permission to enable a permanent permission. You will have received some late representations in relation to this application yesterday, and you should also have received some further late representations today from the applicant's agent. So just to clarify in relation to the one today, because obviously that was received slightly later, the agent has advised that they've noted the recommendation within the report and they've spoken to their client, and whilst they would prefer to have a permanent permission, they would be willing to accept a further temporary permission for 2 years rather than receiving a refusal and having to come back to us just prior to November this year when the current permission expires. So that's just as background for your deliberations. So as I'm sure you'll be aware from the slides that you can see, the site is at the bottom end of Tolney Lane, and you can see it outlined in red on the slides on the screen. It is a site with 10 pitches and has had quite a bit of planning history to it. So back in 2012, the council refused planning permission. The applicants appealed, was dealt with by public inquiry, and the inspector allowed it for a temporary period, and that originally expired in 2018. The applicants then came back to us, one in relation to a permanent permission, which was also refused, but in 2018 to extend that temporary permission. And that again was allowed by committee to enable us as a local authority to identify sites where pitches could be allocated within the district. And I'm sure you're all aware of the current consultation that's underway at the moment, which amongst other matters is looking to provide those pitches within the district in various locations. And just to confirm, in relation to the agent's submission, the details set out in the report in relation to his evidence as to why a permanent permission should be allowed, and reference to the number of pitches that we have a need for, that was submitted prior to us going out to consultation. So you will see in front of you some photographs. These photographs relate to the site back in 2012, although it is understood that largely the development is as it was then. So you can see on this slide the 10 pitches laid out, and you've got the access in through the southern part of the site. Within the report, you'll note that there's been extensive discussion and a strong objection from the Environment Agency in relation to its location because of being within a flood zone. So it's within flood zones 3A and 3B, so the highest category at risk for residents there. But additionally, as I'm sure you will be aware from the flood events in 2019 and early 2020, there's also the issue of flooding along the access road, and the council has been looking into that as well. But as it stands at the moment, in the event of a flood event, there is a risk in terms of safe egress of the site, and hence why only temporary permissions have been given previously. So turning to the report, obviously it's recommended for refusal because of the strong objection from the Environment Agency. However, as all members will be aware from previous reports in relation to Gypsy and Traveller sites, we have a strong unmet need for pitches, and this definitely, in terms of a site, weighs very strongly in its balance because we need pitches. However, we as officers consider the risk to life in relation to this being a permanent site because of the flood risk, that it should be refused for the reasons set out. And you'll note as well that Newark Town Council also object to the proposal. So members, I think, might be considering a temporary permission, and within the late representations today, you'll note that officers are recommending very similar conditions to that which was those that were granted last time. However, if I can, I don't know if you've got access, but draw your attention to condition 8. If you do look to provide for a temporary permission, condition 8 requires the applicants to submit further information to us, and each of the parties on the site need to submit information separately. However, that condition bites. So say if we were occupying the site, if I can use that example, and you all complied with that condition, but I failed to, everyone would need to leave the site. So having spoken to my legal colleague at the end of the table, we think that there should be a variation to that wording, so that it says the use for each respective pitch where a resident fails to comply with this condition hereby permitted shall cease, and all caravans, equipment and materials brought onto the land for the purposes of such use shall be removed within 6 months of the date of any failure to meet any one of the requirements set out in 1 to 7 below by any of the resident dependents listed within condition 1. So it means that that person has to leave because we couldn't be sure of their safety, but the other families could maintain living on the site. But if I can also draw your attention, if members do go with a temporary permission, we have had the comment from the Environment Agency set out at the towards the bottom of page 16, where they've said that if we are minded to grant a temporary permission, that they would like us to refer the matter back to them in advance. So the resolution would need to be minded to approve a temporary, subject to no objection from the Environment Agency. And obviously, should they object, we could then bring the application back to committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, and forgive me, it is remiss of me not to have welcomed Simon Smith to join us at the end of the tables here as our new legal advisor. As you're aware, Pardip has moved on elsewhere, and you're very, very welcome. Therefore, we have before us, and I'm going to move, therefore, not the recommendation we have on page 22, but following up we've just heard from Lisa, I'm going to move that we grant a temporary planning permission for a 2-year period, subject to the amendment to the condition that Lisa has referenced, and indeed it shouldn't be that we grant, that we are minded to grant a temporary consent for a 2-year period, again, in case the Environment Agency wished to call it in. Vice Chairman, are you happy to second that? Right, I throw it open for discussion. Councillor Crowe.
Thank you, Chairman. The last time this came up, Mrs Dobson and myself, Councillor Mrs Dobson and myself, did put up a slight objection with a view to flooding. Now, I noticed that the lane has flooded since. What worries me is if there is over flooding on that area, and they try and use this track up to the A46. Because if you get a cross section of that part of the A46 there, the track they will try to use to get up is at about that angle, and they'll never do it. The only thing that worries me is the flooding, and I worry for the people, not for the site, not for anything else. I just worry for the travellers that are there. So I think I'm quite happy though to go with Lisa. Sorry, yeah, I can't think of her surname. I'm sorry, Lisa. Yeah, thank you. I'm quite happy to go with that, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Goff.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the travelling community have been struggling for many years to remain at Tony Lane. Over the years, when they've had flooding, they've always been evacuated successfully by the district council. They know the risk they're in. It's only the only way that we can resolve this problem, as you said earlier, is to have better sites for them. So I'm happy for a temporary accommodation for them at the present time, and hopefully in the future you can find somewhere else. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Goff. Anybody else wish to speak? Yes, Councillor Mrs. Rainbow.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I fully welcome this change of recommendation. I think it's fair. I understand where Councillor Crow's coming from, but they are residents there at the moment. They do understand the risk that they're living with on a daily basis, presumably. And we cannot evict these people. I mean, it's their home. We would be evicting 10 families. But I think the right thing to do is to give them a temporary permission, and let's hope that we can. I mean, and Mrs. Hughes, you did say that the council is looking into improving the access. Has any work been started or instigated, or?
Do you want to come in, Matt?
Yeah, if I may, Chairman, through you. So, yes, there has been some previous work done on this that has looked at what flood resiliency work would need to take place to be able to do a safe access and egress in the event of a flood. So what that work doesn't do, of course, is raise the levels of the individual sites to take it out of floodplain. It would simply be the access itself. And some work will be coming forward via this committee, the Economic Development Committee, and Policy and Finance in due course, and that will be wrapped up in the wider thinking on the consultation for future sites that's currently out.
And the consultation, which continues until later this month, does indicate locations, preferred locations for gypsy and traveller pitches, which would meet the identified need set out following the GTAA that we undertook. It has, yes, Councillor Wilgers.
I personally support the recommendation you're putting forward, but just from a point of view of the worst case scenario, and there is a flood and somebody dies, is the council covered legally in that position? Would there be any comeback on the council if that actually happened?
I think the answer to that, well, I think the answer to that is no, but I'm not a lawyer, nor am I an expert in planning law. So, Simon, do you want to just comment on that?
Yes, through you, Chair. It would be down to the owner of the land. They would be an owner's liability at the end of the day if somebody were to be injured by floodwater.
I think what I would say, and we'll put it to the vote, is that this was granted temporary consent by an inspector on appeal. We then extended it. On both those previous occasions, there were pretty stringent conditions in which the individuals were named, and they were required to identify, I think, a warden amongst themselves, and they were all required to sign up to the Environment Agency evacuation hotline. I don't believe that has happened, and I don't believe that has happened. I think that's the comment of the Environment Agency. So I do urge the occupants of those pitches please to comply with the conditions which were imposed when the temporary consent was originally granted. As Councillor Walgust has said, that is in their best interest, and it's protecting their lives and the lives of their dependents, and I do hope that they will now comply with those. But the proposal has been moved and seconded that we are minded to grant a consent for a temporary 2-year period subject to the change in condition. I put that to the vote. All those in favour, please show. That is unanimous. It's noted that Councillor Skinner arrived after we started discussing this item and therefore has taken no part in the discussion or the vote. Okay, thank you very much. We now move on to the next item, which is land at Fernwood South. Lisa.
Thank you, Chairman. So this application is presented to members more as a matter of housekeeping than any other aspect. So you'll recollect that it was debated last October where you were all minded to approve, subject to the changes to the conditions in section 106. As part of the previous report, there was also a late item presented which raised a response from County Council in relation to bus services contribution. Having checked the minutes, it wasn't minuted that members also approved the incorporation of the contribution for bus services, which is 525,000, into the agreement. So as officers, we can't ask our colleagues in legal to complete the agreement with the 525,000 because members didn't approve that. And clearly it's necessary as part of this development for that to happen. So that is why this is presented. There were 2 late representations circulated yesterday and also one from County Today. So they make note that within Appendix 2 we refer to bus stops, and they've said that it should say bus services. So the recommendation is subject to it saying bus services within Appendix 2. And also referring to yesterday's late representations, following discussions, officers recommend that condition 25 is omitted because it's no longer needed because of the passage of time, and also that condition 35 is amended because of the Barrett's David Wilson housing scheme having commenced to such a stage that the wording of the condition as it was previously doesn't quite tie up. So subject to those 3 changes, officers recommend it for approval with the conditions and section 106. Thank you, Chairman.
And I therefore formally move approval as per what we've just heard. Vice Chairman?
And I formally second approval in accordance with the officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a tidying up situation. Does anybody wish to speak to it, or do we go straight to the vote? Let's go therefore straight to the vote. Are we all in favour as proposed? Thank you very much. Okay, those were the 2 items for decision. I said I would take an agenda item 6A, and that is that on Thursday, South Kesteven Planning Committee have a meeting which is going to consider a planning application for what's called a designer outlet village, a DOV, adjacent to the downtown Boundary Mill development just to the north of Grantham. Now, members of this committee who are on the committee in 2019 may recall that this came before us then. And indeed, I went down to make representations against the application to their planning committee because of the identified impact it was going to have upon the viability and vitality of Newark Town Centre. Now, the planning committee in 2019 determined to grant approval subject to the signing of a section 106. That section 106 has not yet been signed. However, over the intervening 3 years, the South Kesteven local plan has been the subject of an examination in public, an inspector's report and has now been formally adopted. And therefore, the application is going back before the current planning committee, having been reassessed in the context of the now adopted local plan. The assessed impact upon Newark Town Centre is even greater, in our view, than it was 3 years ago. And therefore, I've agreed on behalf of the council to go down and make representations a second time on Thursday. Depending upon the outcome of that, there will then be a period of time in which a Section 106 will be formalised, finalised and signed. And it may very well be that this authority is sufficiently concerned that it would wish to request a call-in of that application by the Secretary of State. That can only happen before the decision notice is issued, and even if a decision is taken on Thursday by their planning committee, a decision notice will not be issued until the Section 106 is signed. So what we are seeking is approval for Matt as the relevant director in consultation with me as chairman of the committee to request a call-in. We believe it's something that has to be requested by the planning committee, and therefore I'm seeking that authority for Matt this afternoon as a decision. Matt, do you wish to add anything to what I've said?
No, I think you've covered that sufficiently, Roger, that at a time when the high street agenda is more important than ever and impacts are higher and more significant than ever, it appears that colleagues in South Kesteven are promoting a recommendation of supporting something that has a significant adverse impact upon Newark. And I think when you frame it in those terms, it's only right, subject to the debate, of course, and we don't know what the debate is going to be, but if the debate is of sufficient concern to us, I think we need sufficient delegated authority from this committee to be able to make representations to the Secretary of State.
Is there any comment? Yes, Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I mean obviously this is a great worry to us, and at one stage it was saying that if this went ahead, it would deprive Newark of something like 8%. I think it's going to be more like 10%. But the only comment other comment I'd like to make is the fact that you said, with consultation with you and the chairman, I would sooner it to be with you, with Matt, the chairman and vice chairman.
Yes, there speaks a former vice chairman. I'm happy for that to be the case.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Skinner.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. As a member for Newark, I absolutely make no apology for fully endorsing this. We should absolutely be doing everything we can to protect Newark and its town centre, its retail offering, and that to its visitors and our general tourism. My concern, though, Chairman, is the cumulative impact of what our friends and colleagues at South Kesteven are simply looking to do over their plan. Because I'm fully aware that they are looking for this outlet not only in the Gunnerby area, as I would know it as, downtown, whatever you want to call it, but in terms of their south area of Grantham. So what do they think is going to happen to their own town centre in between? You know, it absolutely amazes me, and I fully endorse what you've said and wish you well, and hopefully the Secretary of State will look at it, because at this time more than ever, as Mr Lamb has said, that we need to be protecting and enhancing our town centre, and particularly certain areas of our town centre which are needing addressing, which I know the Towns Fund will support, but there's still a lot more work to do. Thank you.
Yes, it's interesting that the impact upon Grantham Town Centre has been assessed as being less than the impact upon Newark, and that perhaps says something about the current state of Grantham Town Centre. But you're quite right, there is what's called the Rioja development south of Grantham, linked to the new access road, linked to a new 3,700 home Garden Village to the south of Grantham. Construction on that designer outlet village, the Rioja Designer Outlet Village, promoted by a company that's got considerable experience in designer outlet villages. That construction commenced in March of this year. And there's an interesting YouTube video with a quote from the leader of South Kesteven saying that that is going to bring some 1,500 jobs and a £100 million income or benefit to South Kesteven. Now, there are very few places as easily accessible as the south of Grantham and the north of Grantham that can sustain two designer villages. So the danger, I think many would fear, is that you will have two failing designer villages if both go ahead and one is construction has started. And there are implications in there as well. But that's for South Kesteven to assess. We don't believe that any reasonable council could grant approval given the impact upon a neighbouring centre, as great as has been assessed. But that's why, if that is what the planning committee determine, we need to consider what appropriate response this council could consider. So I leave that. Councillor Keith Walker.
Yes.
I'm sure successive councils, as indeed this one, and our successor councils, will take decisions they believe right at the time, but with the benefit of hindsight may not be right. But of course, the other one that we are suffering from at present is the decision to have a northern bypass to Newark rather than the southern route. But that's history now, unfortunately. Councillor Mrs. Rainbow.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just very briefly, I'd support you journeying over there. That there is a report going to Economic Development tomorrow evening looking at footfall in the centre of Newark. We need to protect our footfall. So, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with your suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, can I have a show of hands, therefore, just to give delegated authority, please? Thank you very much. It'll be over to you in due course, Matt. Right, we then move on to agenda item 7, which is an item for information, although I think there will be a decision that we will take this afternoon on this item. So that's the land north of Halorton, Southwell, the solar farm. Lisa.
Thank you, Chairman. So members will recollect determining this application in March of this year, and the details of the reason for refusal is set out within the report. Since that time, the applicants have appealed the decision, and we're due to have the public inquiry running 6 days from the 6th of December this year. As you'll note from the report, a number of plans have been submitted for our consideration in terms of consultation, which have also been submitted to the planning inspector. And just to clarify, it is up to the planning inspector as to whether he will accept these plans that have been submitted post-decision. However, the fact that the applicant has undertaken the consultation and we're presenting it back to yourselves as the decision maker of the application, I anticipate it's quite likely that he or she will. So you'll note from the report that there are 4 changes to the plans. So if you recollect, this is the wider scheme of the panels across. So you've got, if I change my glasses, I can point out where the changes are. Right, so this parcel of land here, panels would be removed. Up to the top here, additional soft buffering. Down here, increased hedgerow, and down here as well, and just along this part as well. So the key change is in relation to this parcel of land here. It's changing back to my other ones. Sorry. You can see these in greater detail when the slide responds. Here. So you can see that this parcel would remove these panels here, and you'd have just the open countryside landscaping as it is at the moment. Change 2 relates to the amount of landscaping just on this corner. Change 3 again relates to the buffering and the provision of a new hedgerow along this elevation here. And as well, loss of a few solar panels just in this top corner and soft landscaping to provide a greater buffer. So you'll note that we have had response from 3 residents who still object. Also yesterday from VIA East Midlands, and they are the body who provided us with the landscape advice on the scheme, and they will do so as part of the inquiry. And today we've had a further late representation from the South Wales Civic Society, and they also maintain and still object to the proposed changes. As officers, we don't consider that it changes the decision that members made back in March, but it was just to seek confirmation that members, if this had been presented back in March, that you would still have refused it for the reasons given. Thank you, Chairman.
So I think the decision we have this afternoon is notwithstanding these changes and on the presumption that they are accepted by the inspector, who is going to be considering the appeal, that they do not change the view of this committee when it refused consent previously. That's going to be my proposition, Vice Chairman.
Formally seconded, Chair.
Do you wish to speak on this, Councillor Brock?
Briefly, Chair. The changes are welcomed. It's an improvement. In my view, they are marginal in the extreme. It certainly makes no difference to my fundamental decision. I'm totally opposed to this, primarily on scale of development.
If not, can we go straight to the vote on that one, please? So, as I said, that even if these changes are accepted by the inspector, and that's the basis of the appeal, that it does not change this committee's decision to refuse the application. All those who are in agreement with that, please show. Thank you. Any opposed? Councillor Gough is two opposed. Councillor Gough, thank you. Right, we then move on to agenda item 8, which is appeals lodged. Are they noted? Thank you. And agenda item 9, appeals determined. Are those noted? Thank you. Those are all the items on the agenda, and that is the shortest planning committee meeting, I think, for quite a few years. But I don't think it's going to last that way. So, pardon? 1928?
No, 28 years.
You can go back further than that. I can go back 33. Okay, I therefore call the meeting to a close, and thank you very much for your attendance, and enjoy the rest of our summer, which ends tomorrow night.